What happens when your dream job becomes the source of your deepest pain? And for many in ministry, the idea of being coached off staff can feel like a gut punch. And really, in the end, it leaves questions about identity, calling, and purpose in its wake. That was Jonathan Carone's reality. And in today's episode, he shares the messy and often painful journey of being let go from a church staff. But his story doesn't stop there. Jonathan also opens up about his courageous decision to seek reconciliation and shows us what it means to choose healing over bitterness. So if you've ever struggled to find peace after a tough transition, or you've wondered, how do I actually navigate relational fallout in ministry? This is a good conversation to listen to. It's raw, it's honest, and it looks at the cost of church transitions and the hope that can come on the other side, even if it doesn't go as planned. Listen up. This is the Life After Ministry podcast. Hey, Jonathan Carone, welcome to the Life After Ministry podcast. Good to have you here.
Thank you, sir. Glad to be here. It's been a long time coming. We've talked about it a bunch.
We have talked about this a bunch. We were in the same places at the same time and never knew it until now. And
here's the funny thing. You and I were in the same room long before, and didn't know it, long before me and the guy I've co-hosted a podcast for over 90 episodes were in the same room at the same time. So That's just a funny combination.
Yeah. Sometimes I look at my wife and say, I wonder if I ever passed you at some point, like as children, we were playing on the same park and we just didn't know it. But maybe this moment was meant that we finally got to come together, right?
Right.
Yeah, there you go. Well, you were working at a church that I actually happened to be candidating at more than a decade ago, which was very interesting. I was looking for a way out at that point, and you were really in that season, in that time, there were some thoughts going through your head of maybe this is not for me. Give me a little bit of backstory.
Yeah, so I only worked at that church for 4.5 years, but I had like 6 different roles. So it was a weird combination because I was hired directly out of seminary into what people would call, it was called an internship at a time. Now, at the time then, it would be called a residency now. So I was hired into the high school ministry for a 1 to 2 year internship, which really was residency. After a year, I basically said, hey, I need to grow up and get a real job that pays decent money, not $1,000 a month. So is there anything we can do here? So they're like, yeah, we can give you more responsibility for a little bit more pay. So I took on the young adult ministry and rebuilt that. And so 6 months into that second year, our creative director left and they came to me and said, hey, we'd like to hire you full-time role as the creative director, but you got to finish out your high school ministry responsibilities too. So it was 2012, January 2012. I became the creative director, was the high school intern. So I oversaw 6 weekend services, the high school service of 200 kids on a Wednesday night. We started a capital campaign that I was in charge of all the promotions for, and I was getting married that semester too. So first half of 2012 was nuts.
For like $1,500, right? Just a slight raise.
It was thankfully then I got paid adult money, but I was working about 60 to 80 hours a week for that semester, just because there was so much going on. When that was done, go ahead.
Were you loving that season? Like, were you like in this and saying like, I'm doing it all, I'm loving it? Or were you feeling the burn at that point even?
I felt like I wasn't doing anything up to the quality I expected to because I was doing so much. So I felt like I had like 3 or 4 different bosses at the time. So I felt like I was letting them all down. And that was the story of my entire career at that church, because I was always in some sort of split role. Once that ended over the summer, they hired me on full-time, big boy, but it was creative director. So over the weekend, and communications director. So overall the promotions of the church. And at the time we were about 1,600 people with 6, we had venues, not campuses. So we had 3 different venues at the time on campus. And so we were a very event heavy church. So I felt like nothing I was doing was up to the quality it needed to be to make everyone happy. So there was always the tension of, if I did my weekend job well and the services went off without a hitch, and the lead pastor was happy, and the worship pastor was good to go, and all of that went well, then there was something that would have happened in the communications department. Something like the bulletin had a misspelling in it, or somebody was mad their announcement didn't get whatever it needed to get, or whatever. So it was always that tension between serving multiple masters and not being able, and all the bosses wanted 100%, but my job was 50-50 float. It might go 60-40 or whatever, but they all wanted more than what I was physically able to give.
Yeah. And so what is that like tension point where are you the one that's initiating and deciding I'm out of here, or is that coming more from the church?
The joke that we say is that I was affectionately coached off staff. And so I wasn't fired, but I was basically told, I mean, I'll be completely honest here. I was offered to go from salaried to an hourly position that would have cut my pay by about $10,000. I would have kept my benefits, but the way they framed it to me was I would be paid hourly so that all the other things that I wanted to do, I'd have the freedom to go do those if I wanted to, if I got all my work done. So that didn't go over well with me. I was told that the first weekend of October in 2014, and 5 days before that, we had found out we were pregnant with our first kid. So like, imagine all the things that 24, 25-year-old Jonathan was dealing with at the time. I think I was 28 at the time. And then they come in and tell me they want to cut $10,000 off my pay. So that was their way of pushing me out without firing me. And so that the listeners don't get the bad rap, I have gone through, and like the executive pastor who was over that decision, we have reconciled later. So like he and I have had the conversation of like, hey, you hurt me when you did this. Well, I did this because you did that. And like owning up to each other. Hey, I apologize for that. I apologize for that. Explaining and forgiveness and repentance and all that. So we are good. So like, I'm 10 years removed. I don't hold any ill will. So when I say things like that, I want people to hear that like, this is what happened. Like I will own the stuff that I did leading up to it. I will honestly talk about the things that I felt like they did wrong because I've had those conversations with the people involved. So I feel comfortable doing that without speaking ill will of anyone.
Yeah, so I'm curious about that because that is when we're working with people who are coming out of their position in ministry, it's kind of one of those last steps that we, after we've walked through, they've found a new job and they've received counseling and there's a sense of wholeness and purpose, and I know what I'm going to do with the next phase of my life. We ask a very disturbing question. It's disruptive to their life because they're ready to go. And I'll just kind of ask this question of, where are you at with the church that you are no longer a part of? How are you doing with the people that you're no longer with? And I can say that even just knowing that even where I'm at today, I don't have full reconciliation with absolutely everybody and want that. But it's a disruptive question. How do you go about, like, it's a little bit of the chicken and the egg, or whoever's more mature is going to make the first move. But why did you do that? Or was that initiated on their part? Like, but it's there's a humility and there's a process to that is not easy.
So that was initiated by me. We stayed in town for 4.5 years after leaving the church. So it was a weird situation because I lived about 20 minutes from the church in a different part of town. So even though we didn't change where we lived, it's almost like we changed towns because our lives shifted to a different part of town. So once we realized we were leaving Knoxville and we're going to move, that was in May of 19. And I knew we weren't moving till July, end of July probably. And I didn't want to leave town with bad relational things weighing on me. So the day we decided we were going to move, I emailed my XP and said, hey, we're leaving town. And let me back up. I had already cleared the air with my senior pastor like a year or two before that when he retired. And so he and I didn't really have any issues, but we had started rebuilding the relationship a couple years before. So the XP was the one that I hadn't talked too much to since. So I emailed him. I was like, hey, I don't want this hanging over me. Sometime before I leave in July, can I have an hour of your time to grab lunch just so we can talk through things? And he emailed me back within about 5 minutes and said, I'm free for lunch today. Ooh. And so that day, he and I went to lunch together, and we sat there for about 90 minutes. And he called me on some stuff that he thought I did. Some were fair, some I thought were unfair, and I told him they were. I told him what I felt at the time and what I felt like he could have done better. And he owned some of it, and some of it he explained as to why it had to happen the way that it did. And even if I disagreed with what he said, I'll give you an example because examples help. Another friend of mine that was on that staff was coached off staff too, but he was given a 6-month run up and said, hey, we don't think you're like where we're going as a church is right for you're right for this position, but we don't want to leave you to the winds. Like, here's 6 months, do your job, but spend the next 6 months figuring out what's next for you. And I told him, I was like, it hurt me that I didn't get that. That would have been like, I was about to have a kid for the first time. I'm going into this with no savings. It would have been really nice for me to have that 6-month run up to be able to build something and figure out things. And he told me, well, we talked about that. And one of the other guys on staff who knew you better than I did felt like we needed to just rip the Band-Aid off, and that would be better for you because of the way your personality is you needed the pressure of sinking or swimming.
So I have a question with that because there is we have a lot of XPs, decision makers in the church, people who are listening to this, right? It's not just the people who've experienced it from that side of hurt. So there's always that question, and we wrestle through that with the churches and the folks that we're talking to. Is there part of you like which one wins? Like on this side of the equation for you, like would it have just been easier just to rip the Band-Aid off and say, hey, we're going to let you go? Would you rather have been coached off but given the 6-month window? Like, is there a better way? Is there a best way to do that? And maybe it's like, okay, you could let me go right now, but let's do this with honor, dignity, love, and grace. What was missing in that? Or was it just even the unfairness of what all of that felt like to you?
So when I was coached off staff, it was the culmination of about 18 months of conflict at the church. I'm going to take a minute to give the backstory so that people can understand what happened. Once I took that split creative director, communications director role, I was in that for about a year, and our executive pastor at the time decided to leave. And so this is summer of 13. He left at the beginning of 13. And so by the summer, we had hired the new XP, and he came in, and we were getting to know each other. I really liked him. Like, I loved the way he was doing things. And at the same time, I was drowning. I felt like, again, like I was saying, I couldn't do anything well. So I went to my direct report and said, hey, I'm exhausted. I'm drowning. I'm boohoo crying in his office because I feel like the pressure, I can't handle it all. And so he goes to the XP and the new XP and tells him, Jonathan's drowning. He needs help. So that's the summer. A month or two later, XP comes to me and says, hey, I just want to let you know I'm going to hire a communications director. I hugged him. I was so excited that I was going to get help that I hugged him. What I didn't realize at the time was he had hired the comms director to go above me, and that I was going to report to the comms director. What he didn't know, and neither one of us knew at the time, was that when I was hired as communications director a year before, that never got written into my job description officially. So when he's looking at my job description and looking at what I'm having to do, he's like, oh, well, it makes sense. Hire a communications director. Jonathan can report to the communications director, and that just makes everything gravy. Me as a aspiring church worker in their late 20s who wants to, I want to rise up the org chart. I want to have more influence and authority. I was thinking the communications director would come below me and that I would be starting to build my team and I could exert some leadership in that way. And so that was the beginning of the conflict, because 27-year-old at the time, I'm demoted after working my butt off for 2.5 years. I remember sitting in his office one day when the conflict was going on, because they were saying I was being insubordinate. And at this time, I didn't realize that we were not equals, at least. I didn't realize that the comms director was my boss. And so it's me, comms director, worship pastor, who was my boss on the creative director side, and XP sitting in his office one morning. And they're accusing me of insubordination. I didn't understand why. And that's when they said that, according to the org chart, the communications director is above me. And I'm like, it just hit me, and I teared up. And I'm like, so I got demoted? Like, I remember saying it just like that. I got demoted. And the XP looked at me, he's like, no. And then I was like, but I was doing this. I had the role. And now you brought in someone new. And it hit him in that moment what had happened. And he even apologized at that moment. Like, this was not my intent to demote you. But relationally and emotionally, that had already happened. That toothpaste was out of the tube. I had been demoted. And so we spent the next year trying to make it work, trying to move some stuff around, trying to figure it out, but the hurt was there. And so I torpedoed a lot of stuff relationally for about 6 months after that, just reacting out of late 20s hurt, immature hurt. And so by the time we got to the point where they offered me the hourly instead of salary rate, had they given me a 6-month window, this is looking back 10 years, I would not have been a good employee during that time, because I would have mentally checked out. I had been hurt, and now you're telling me to go look for something else. So it's like, I wouldn't have been able to give the attention and dedication that they were looking for in someone in that position. Ripping off the Band-Aid hurt really bad, but it was the best move for the church. Was it the best move for me? Probably not. I would have enjoyed that and appreciated the 6 months, the salary, and because the chance to save, the chance to change our lifestyle around. But I mean, it was 2 months, 2 months or 2.5 months from that day till my last day there, that we had to figure stuff out. So it was a really stressful time. So I think it's the reality that what is right for the organization isn't always right for the human being impacted by that. And that's the hard tension of organizational leadership at any point.
Yeah.
So I can look back 10 years later and say that was best for them, but it hurt. And so two competing things can be true at the same time. And that's really hard when we have emotions.
You know, we spend a lot of time on life after ministry talking about the after, and I want to get to that in a second. But I want just people to listen to this, because I do think that what happens after ministry and how we feel about that in the next season, it is tremendously impacted by how we're let go, right? So once the toothpaste is out of the tube, it's hard to get it back in, obviously, but that's the thing is we have so many people coming to us who are the toothpaste has already been squeezed out, and now that relationship has the damage has been done in that moment, and the time to start talking to somebody like me with pastoral transitions is that moment when you've as an organization have made that decision to let somebody go on your team. That's when you also need to have a conversation about how do we do this well? How do we not just cut them off and at the knees? Because one of the first questions we ask is, well, what did you do to help try to avoid this moment? Like, have there been good expectations? Do we have a job description? Have we sat down and said, like, hey, we need you to be performing in this place? There should never be these surprises. So how we let people go, how we say goodbye matters, because I think the church is really good at saying hello. But that whole goodbye piece, and it undermines the rest of the culture, the rest of the staff, and they're thinking, could I be next? And now it just starts to chip away just a little bit at our trust in the organization, our motivation for showing up every day, because you don't want to be the person that, the next meeting at 4:00 on a Thursday afternoon, is it me? Am I the one who is next?
Yep.
And you're not at this point, you're not in a pastoral role. And we actually had somebody email me a month ago, and they said, What about just people who are on staff, not at a pastoral level, but they're on church staff and they're like, they hurt also, right? So we're not just pastoral transitions. We're working with all kinds of people at all kinds of different levels. And if they're human, they are deserving of dignity and honor, even on the way out, right?
Yeah. And two things about my transition out. One, what I found out years later in that conversation at Chipotle before I left is that my XP admitted he was not healthy at the time either. And the staff culture at the time was not healthy. And his relationship with the lead pastor, them trying to figure out how they work together and learning that relationship wasn't the healthiest at the time. So him being vulnerable enough to admit that he wasn't in the best place at the time meant a lot to me, because even though it hurt going through it, when someone comes to you and says, hey, I wasn't in a great place when that was made, I could have handled it better because of that. Still would have done the same thing, but could have handled it better if I was in a healthier place. Again, from a human standpoint, there's some grace and empathy there, because I have been in a bad place before where I have handled things wrong. And so I want someone to give me the same grace I give. And so I've got to give that as well. So that's one thing. The other thing, talking about how churches can help. So when I left, I turned down the job, the hourly position, and my rebuttal to them was, what if you paid me a contract rate and I went out and started my own business? And so they were open to that. And so for the next month or so, we went back and forth of what that would look like. And that was the genesis of me going out and starting the business I now own and run. At the time was mainly graphic design. It's now morphed into copywriting and websites and a bunch of other stuff. But it was graphic design for churches. Church Media Squad and all those things didn't exist at the time. So a lot of churches were using freelancers to do their job, their creative work, because it was cheaper than having to hire a full-time creative person. And so, to the church's credit, they signed on for 6 months at a retainer base that was about 55 to 60% of what I had been making. So when I left, it was rocky at first, and it never was a great relationship for those 6 months. But for 6 months, they paid about 50 to 60% of what I've been making before, so that I had a foundation to start a business from and wasn't starting from scratch. They also let me take my computer with me. So they gifted me that. I mean, it was a 3-year-old MacBook Pro at the time. So it wasn't the greatest computer, but it was still saved me $1,500 when I started the business. I don't know how much that was, we want to let him leave well, or how much of it was, this helps us with a transition so we don't have to find somebody right away. Probably a little bit of both. But they were gracious enough to give me that, at least to get started. So it was one of those, like, relationally, we weren't good at the time. It was awkward going into the church every week and starting the business, because I still had to go over there and do a couple things, but it helped. And I don't know how I would have been able to start my business. Thankfully, my wife had a full-time job at the time. She carried our insurance. So we had some backbone there. But without that 6-month contract to get started, I don't know how different transition would have been for me. And the interesting thing, that you said something a minute ago that made me think of this. When the transition happens to us, it impacts us in what we do. So yeah, I'm not in a pastoral position by any means. I don't work for a church, but about 50 to 60% of my business is working with churches. And so when I first left the church staff, I had a crisis of probably confidence, like, God, I thought you made me for this. I thought you wired me for this communications thing, that, like, to help people hear about you. Like, I thought I was really good at this. And so I started questioning what, if I'd gotten it wrong. Did I even understand what God wanted me, how he wired me, all this stuff? And it wasn't until I went to a conference that fall, where many of the speakers were saying the exact same things I was trying to do at the church, that I realized it wasn't a me thing. It was a fit thing. It wasn't a giftings thing. It was a fit for that church. So God had wired me with these gifts, with these talents and abilities, but what that church needed at that moment was not what I had and not who I was. And so 10 years later, I just launched a website for a 5,000 member, 100-year-old Black church, which is nuts. Like, this was a 1,600 person, predominantly white church. And I got contracts with like churches all across the country right now. And I've worked with missionaries around the world. So like 10 years later, I can look back and say, yeah, the gifting was there. The fit wasn't. And when you're going through it in the moment, that is really hard to understand. But I think that's the piece that stuck with me the most, is that it wasn't a gifting thing. It was a fit thing.
So what do you say to somebody who's on a church staff, in a ministry, nonprofit? They're trying to figure out, they're feeling like this is not a fit. I'm not sure what I'll do. And it's different. You have a different kind of skill set than, the teaching pastor who's like, well,
Correct.
Where am I going to go teach if I'm not teaching up front, right? Like that's a different kind of question. You have a pretty good,
Insurance sales.
marketable insurance sales. Is that what you said? Yeah. I mean, it happens quite a bit, right? But how do you navigate? Like if you were to navigate all of this over again, would you not take so many split roles? Would you start to look at something else on the side? Like how would you, if you could wave a magic wand, what would that look like?
I think the first thing I would have to do is work on the identity piece, that who I am is not wrapped up in what I do. 38-year-old me understands that a lot more than 25 to 28-year-old me did. What I do is a big part of me, but it's not who I am. And for someone who's a teaching pastor, my guess is that person is motivated by helping others understand who God has made them to be and what he has for them. Teaching from stage is one way you can do that, but there are so many jobs that you get to interact with other people and have a tangible impact on their life that maybe you're not opening scripture and telling them about it, but the way you live your life and the way you serve them in that job can point them to Jesus too. So is your identity in that guy who stands on, or woman who stands on stage and teaches the Bible, or is your identity in someone who's loved by Jesus and created to serve and honor him in whatever you do? And I think what happens in the church world especially is we think a calling and a vocation is the same thing. If we are called to do this thing, we must be paid to do that as a job. When in reality, in today's world, there are so many different ways to do that. Like, I host a podcast that talks about Christianity and faith in ways that I could never talk about if I was on staff at a church. And I don't get paid for it. It's something I do in my free time because I'm able to and because I've carved out that time. But I have a job that allows me the space financially to take the time to do that. And so I feel I'm still fulfilling my calling, even in a way that might be even more effective than if I was working at a church, because I'm talking about Jesus in like the rough, raw, honest ways of following him, in ways that if I was on staff at a church, I would never be able to do that because the church neuters you a little bit. There's that old Mark Batterson quote that a pastor often is a lion in a cage who has to be neutered a little bit so that he makes sure the elders and the people on staff or people in the church aren't offended when there's so much more that he wishes he could say. And I'm able to say all that because my job, my income does not come from the podcast that I host. We get a few hundred listeners. They're impacted by it, but it doesn't impact my job. It doesn't impact, like, I'm able to do that. So what it would tangibly look like if I was able to go back, I don't know. But I know that divorcing my vocation from my identity was the most important piece of becoming emotionally and spiritually healthy once again.
And it's hard, right? Because you've heard
It's
that
so
message
hard.
before. Even when you're in the church, like, don't let this become who you are. But man, until you're on the other side of it, it's a hard separation to make. We talk a lot about identity, calling, and assignment, and how do we differentiate between those different pieces in our life?
I have had to completely, and this is, I think this is a church thing as well. I have had to rewire what work is to me, because 90s, 2000s, 2010s in the church, we talked so much about fulfilling your calling and work and being somebody in the workplace and doing what God's created you to do and finding the vision God has for your life and all these things. And I think inadvertently, I'm going to be gracious and say inadvertently, gave the idea that work was absolutely something that God calls us to do. And the job we're in is supposed to be fulfilling because God's called us to that place. And what I have come to realize is that work being fulfilling is a gift. It is a grace from God because it's not always going to be fulfilling. Sometimes work is just there to finance your life. And what I love my job about 70% of the time. There's about 30% of it that I don't like at all, but it pays me well enough that it's worth it to do those things because of what it allows me to do otherwise. Yep. I coach my kids' soccer team. I'm the PA announcer at my local high school baseball team. I have 2 podcasts at this point. Like I have a standing disc golf game with some friends on a Thursday afternoon that I'm able to do. And so work has allowed me to relationally do things that I wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. So the way I have changed my view of work is I don't have to be passionate about all that I do, but is it something I can tolerate and do well so that it allows me to do the things I absolutely love? And if it ever gets to where I can't tolerate it or it's unhealthy, then I'll do something else. But my calling is much bigger than my vocation. And what I have tried to do is allow my vocation to finance the things I feel called to do. And that's a subtle shift, but it's what allows you to go out and do the thing you might not love, but it pays pretty well because we know the church doesn't. And so maybe if you're transitioning out of church, like I joke about the insurance salesman or whatever it is, like maybe you go do that for a little while and you recover spiritually, you recover emotionally, and you do a job that maybe you don't love, but it pays for your kids' groceries and it allows you the time to go to your kids' basketball games. And you're able to do the things that you're still called to do, but it's not part of your vocation anymore.
I totally agree. Amen to that. So, and what I hear you saying is what we hear from everybody who's been through this transition and they live to tell about it and they're on the other side of it is there's life after ministry and there's kingdom impact after ministry. In fact, you probably feel like you're still doing that even when you're doing a website for a ministry for a church.
Yeah. I mean, I built a website for a deck contractor. I had to say, careful how I say that. A deck contractor who is very involved in his church. So we actually had to put the project on pause for 2 weeks because he was in Africa on a mission trip. But me building a website for his business allows his business to grow, which then helps finance him so that he can go to Africa to do mission trips on another continent. So at no point was there a church involved in my interaction with him, but I'm still able to work with someone who's making kingdom gospel impacts, even though the 501c3 nonprofit organization known as the local church was not involved in our transactions. Or I'm able to go and I coach U10 soccer. So I'm able to show love and respect and kindness to 8 and 9-year-olds that maybe they're not getting at home. And my life points to something being different. And I get to have conversation with those parents. So I'm not teaching a Bible lesson, but I'm still doing a lot of the same stuff you do in kids ministry by how I interact with those kids. The high school kids over on the baseball team, I'll see them out in public and 17 and 18-year-olds will stop and talk to me. That's student ministry. It's not teaching a Bible lesson on a regular basis, but they follow me on Instagram. So they see the stuff ministry-wise that I post. So I'm still able to be a positive Christian influence in their life. Is that not ministry? It's not vocational ministry, but it's still living my life for Jesus in a way that ministers to others.
And what a great example for the rest of the church, right? That you can do this and you don't have to be a paid professional like like those who went to seminary. Jonathan, I love the conversation. What are you up to now? We've got a sense of that. You're still doing communications in many ways, but you're doing that through the website. But you have some pretty thought-provoking, and I think the lion is out of the cage in terms of some of the podcasting that you're doing. But where do people connect with what you're doing and follow you on Instagram and all the other things?
So if you want to know all the things I do, you can go to jonathancarone.com. It's got my business there. I do marketing and messaging for businesses, nonprofits, and churches. It's got a link to both my podcasts. I got a podcast called Tension, where we talk about the how to live life in the tension between what we were taught in the evangelical church and what our culture is saying today. So we just did a series in the spring that was all about how cultural Christianity is killing the American church. We've got a new season starting in February that is going to be the quiet conversations that no one's having. Like, if I'm honest, I feel this way. Things like, if I'm honest, I'd follow Jesus if it didn't mean having to trust other people. Or I'd be more trusting of Jesus if it didn't mean trusting people. Or like, there are things about Jesus that I don't necessarily love, but I'm still going to follow. Like, honest conversations about that we can't have from stage in church. And then in January, I'm starting a new podcast called Healthy Sports Parents. That's all about helping parents who are parenting kids through youth sports do it in a way that keeps their kids mentally and emotionally healthy, so that you can have a great relationship with your kids even after they're done playing, whenever that might be. So all sorts of stuff, jonathancarone.com to find all of that.
Good, and I'll put that in the show notes. I didn't know that sports parents were unhealthy. Is that a thing?
Yeah, that's a whole different conversation, which is why we're starting that show.
Yeah, I may have been that dad once or twice yelling at the ump, "You're missing a good game, Blue," right? So
that's the fun part, because in that show, we get to share some of those stories too, with like where we've messed up with people who have been there and done that, and hopefully helping people get better.
Jonathan Carone, thanks for being here on the Life After Ministry podcast. Thanks for sharing your story.
Thanks, Matt. I appreciate what you do.
Hey, well, thank you, Jonathan. Your story shows us that ministry transitions don't have to end in brokenness. And yes, being coached off staff hurts deeply. And your willingness to seek reconciliation with leaders is a powerful example of choosing healing over resentment. You know, at Pastoral Transitions, we believe transitions can be handled with love, with dignity, with grace. And we also know that how someone leaves has a ripple effect. It's not just on the outgoing leader, but on the entire team and congregation left behind. If this story has resonated with you, we'd love for you to help us make a difference. Visit pastoraltransitions.com. You can support our ministry leaders in their most vulnerable, difficult seasons and situations. Your partnership with us makes it possible to walk with pastors and staff as they navigate that hard journey of leaving and finding hope again. We want to redefine how we handle transitions and terminations and make them a time of unity, multiplying and not dividing. If you want to learn more about what Jonathan's doing, you can see all of his work and the great things that he's doing for the kingdom at jonathancarone.com. Thanks for listening. Shalom.